and then welcome today to Texas Quail Index. This webinar is made available by a partnership with Bob Barton, Bill Hubbard, and myself, Eric Taylor. And I've talked enough, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll hand it over to Becky.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Taylor. My name is Becky Rosiska, and I'm a Wildlife Extension Associate with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. I've been working full-time for AgriLife since January on the various extension programs that we have that are part of the Reversing the Quail Decline Initiative. This webinar is on the Texas Quail Index, which is one of those extension programs. And it's focused, or the Texas Quail Index itself is focused on teaching landowners and our county extension agents how to monitor both bobwhite and scaled quail, and really what to look for as far as quality quail habitat. So I think, as Dr. Taylor mentioned, we had two other webinars as part of our series. This is the third one. If you missed any of those webinars, you can go back and watch them. The first one was a general webinar on the overall Quail Decline Initiative by Dr. Rollins. And then we also had one by Robert Perez, the Upland Game Bird Program Leader with Texas Parks and Wildlife. He gave an overview of what some of TPWD's efforts are statewide as far as the habitat restoration and involving landowners. But the Texas Quail Index is what I'm here to talk to you about today. And first, though, I wanted to give you just a quick overview of the Quail Decline Initiative. This was a $2 million This is a $2 million exceptional item that was funded through the state legislature last year. And within AgriLife, it's a two-part initiative, and it covers both extension programs and research projects. So of which the Quail Index falls into those. And we have a couple of other extension programs that I'm involved with that I wanted to tell you a little bit about. The first of those are these what we call Quail Appreciation Days. Dr. Rollins and I just finished up an extensive tour of Texas this year, holding these events with our county extension agents. These Quail Appreciation Days are really just a one-day workshop where we hit on all different aspects of quail biology and conservation. We try and break it down for you into simple terms so that, to allow you to look at the world through the eyes of a quail and understand their needs. It's a field. We have a portion in the field in the afternoon. We spend the morning in the classroom, and then we provide you lunch with those. And we're planning on, as I said, we finished all our dates for 2014, but we're planning on more dates for 2015. So be on the lookout for that. And then also we have our Quail Masters program, which is a really much expanded version, I guess, of our Quail Appreciation Days. It's a full-length, in-depth class. We actually offer credit for graduate students, and we meet 4 times during the year for a 3-day workshop at different locations across the state. And again, with those, we spend part of the time in the classroom learning about quail biology and conservation, and then part of the time out in the field. So I think probably the most valuable thing is really getting to visit some of the most premier quail ranches in the state. So you get to see land and ranches that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. So it's definitely an intensive course, only for serious students of quail. So we just finished up our North Texas Quail Masters, and next year we're going to be starting a South Texas Quail Masters in March of 2015. So if you're interested in either of those programs, the best place to keep up to date on this and to see dates and happenings is our Facebook page, which is the TANU Quail Decline Initiative Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, I highly recommend it. So on to the Texas Quail Index. The Texas Quail Index is really, at the heart of it, it's a monitoring program. We're monitoring quail populations statewide, but more than that, it's about teaching people and really increasing the overall community involvement. And in doing so, we want to raise awareness of the overall decline of quail in the state and nationwide. And also we want to give landowners the tools that they need to monitor quail populations on their land. So we have 35 counties involved. Each county has one participating site within that county. And we have a pretty good covering of the state of Texas. Most of our sites are in the Rolling Plains area and the Edwards Plateau, but we do have a few out in the Trans-Pecos, South Texas Plains, and the Gulf Coast Prairies. So before we get too far into this, I wanted to give you a pop quiz just to get everybody participating and make sure we're on the same page. So I've mentioned this a couple of times now about term quail populations, but I wanted to quiz you on is a quail population the collection of individual quail that occupy A, the state of Texas, B, their entire range nationwide, C, the ranch or property of interest, or D, all of the above. So go ahead and use those response, the A, B, C, or D response up there. And I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, I think we got most everybody. You post that? Good, yeah, the answer is D, because it really depends on how you define it, right? So usually, a lot of times we talk about populations, you know, at the state level, because that's commonly where our laws and regs come from, especially for hunted species. Sometimes they come from the nationwide, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but usually it's the state agency. So we often talk about populations in the in the state of Texas. We also talk about populations nationwide or across their entire range. For bobwhite quail, that would be the southeastern United States. But for the Texas Quail Index, what I'm talking about when I say populations is really at the ranch level, or whether it's the WMA or just the property of interest. And that's because we want people to monitor at this level, because that's really the only level that you as a landowner have control over, and you can make management decisions every day to help or hinder quail populations on your property. So why would you want to monitor quail or any other wildlife species for that matter? We monitor deer quite often to get information on harvest quotas and things of that nature. But really, for monitoring quail on your local populations, they may not reflect the overall state trends. Texas Parks and Wildlife measures quail on an ecoregion level, but that may not actually reflect what's happening on your particular land. So to really get the information that you need to assess the effectiveness of your management actions, or to make educated decisions on harvest, how many birds you want to shoot that year, or maybe even if you do want to go hunting that year on your property, you need local scale data. And if you're also collecting habitat data to go along with those population data, it can help you identify the weak links in your habitat, or areas that you need to focus on to improve your habitat to maximize those quail populations. So I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing. There we go. So the way the Texas Quail Index is organized, We do this through our county extension agent's office, and then it's their job to go out and recruit a landowner, a private landowner, or a WMA, a place to conduct the surveys. And then it's also their responsibility to put together a team of people to collect the data. And typically that's been Texas Master Naturalists, former brigaders, bobwhite brigaders, or even former quail masters, people of that nature, and also the landowner. It's important to have the landowner participating. And the folks pictured here are Texas Master Naturalists from the Rolling Plains chapter. They've done an excellent job as working on the Wichita County TQI team. We have several Master Naturalist chapters involved, and they've all done a really excellent job. As you'll see in a minute, we ask a lot of people participating in this. So there's a lot of different tasks. It's broken down into 8 different tasks, and we use these tasks to assess the quail population or the quail equation on a particular property. So what I mean by that is looking at factors that measure quail abundance, and those are spring call counts, roadside counts, fall covey counts, and a harvest index. And then looking at factors that actually affect that quail abundance. So we use dummy nests, we use predator surveys, habitat surveys, and rainfall data to measure those factors that affect quail abundance. So looking at it on a yearly scale, you can see our busiest time is during the breeding season or nesting season. That's, we start off with our spring call counts, our dummy nest surveys, predator surveys, and habitat surveys. And then moving into the fall, we do roadside counts and fall covey counts. And over the hunting season, we ask that folks keep track of a harvest index. So we really we keep people busy throughout the year on these different tasks. So before we go on with the individual protocol for each of these, I wanted to talk a little bit about what kinds of data that we're collecting here. So on the scale of, I guess, from least intensive to most intensive, what we do for the Texas Quail Index falls somewhere in the middle. So your most intensive data is going to be your density data. That's data that's typically collected as part of a research project or something. That's for bobwhite quail, that means typically helicopter counts where you fly low and slow and cover the entire area. And as you might imagine, that's very costly and very time consuming. So at the other end of the scale, you have just a general species presence and absence. Where for quail it would be, do quail occupy this particular property or this particular habitat on the property? So that's a very coarse scale, and we try and fit somewhere in the middle where you have data that's easy enough to collect, but yet can still provide you useful information to make decisions with. So when I say index, it's what we call an index. Our indice data is used to estimate the relative size of an animal population. So it's something that's correlated with the population. And we hope that as the true population increases, the index will also reflect that increase. So we're not measuring the population directly. We don't know how many are actually on the landscape, but we want to be able to track those trends, those changes in population over time. And as I said, it's a little bit coarser scale, but for most management decisions that you're going to make, it provides you with plenty of information. So I also wanted to talk about a little bit about accuracy versus precision in data collection. And I really just wanted you to keep this in mind as we go through the protocol. The protocols are designed and standardized across the counties so that that the data is comparable, and that really falls into the precision aspect of this. Our precision is that we have a specific protocol that every time you go out and you collect certain information, you do it the same way every time. For spring call counts, that might be starting at the same time every day and monitoring quail over a 5-minute period rather than changing that to be a 3-minute or a 6-minute period every time you go out. So as we move through these, I want you to keep in mind the factors that you need to control for. That are going to affect the precision of the data you collect, and also accuracy. And with these protocols, really accuracy is referring to recording the birds that either you see or hear, recording those accurately and recording it in a timely manner. So the first step for the Texas Quail Index that we ask people to do, or any monitoring program, would be to establish a permanent transect or permanent locations on the land. For the index, this serves as really the backbone for all of our data collection. We ask that people make them about 7 miles long with 8 stations. You may want to vary that depending on the property, but that's kind of a bare minimum that we're looking at. The reason for that you need a permanent transect is once again controlling for those factors. The real utility in these data that we collect is being able to compare on a certain property, compare across the years. Or compare across habitat types. And to be able to do that, you can't change locations that you monitor every year. You need to have the same locations so that you're only changing one variable, which assuming that would be the number of quail on the landscape. So a few guidelines to think about when you're setting up your permanent locations to start a monitoring program. Or for the Texas Quail Index is as I said, every property is going to be slightly different, but you don't want to pick and choose spots. So if you have habitats or you have locations on your property where you know that there's quail and there have always been quail, you don't want to just monitor those areas because it's going to give you a very skewed view of what your true population is across your property. So you don't want to choose and pick. You want to make sure that your route or your permanent locations are representative of what's actually there on the landscape. And you also want to make sure that your mile markers are far enough apart to where you're not double counting. That's very important when we get into call counts because you can hear calls from a long distance away. So if your mile markers are too close together, you're going to be counting the same birds twice. So you want to guard against that. And then beyond that, you can pretty well make your locations in any configuration that you want. But you also want to keep in mind that you're going to need to return to these locations, many times per year. So you want to make it very accessible and easy to get to. So another big factor to think about is for the transect is to stay away from noisemakers, basically. You want to stay away from busy roads, highways, and noisy oil field equipment. I know that's been a huge problem for some of our cooperators out west, that you can't get away from it entirely, but as much as possible you want to try, because those sources of noise will really affect your ability to hear quail calls, and it'll really affect your counts. So the first data collection task that we have for people is the spring call counts, also known as spring whistle counts or rooster counts. This is very simple. It's just going out and you're counting the calling roosters that you hear on the landscape. This is done during typically for South Texas, you may want to start in April sometime. North Texas, or in May, sometime in that time period. And what you're doing by counting the number of calling roosters is getting a measure of the population's breeding potential. It's a loose index of relative abundance, but because different birds will call, or fewer birds will call based on the weather conditions, it's really more of an index of how much effort quail are going to put into reproducing that year. If the conditions are not good, then they simply won't put as much effort into it. So it's something that we do. It's right before nesting season, and it'll give you that measure of reproductive effort. So the protocol is very simple. You're going to start on your first mile marker. You'll want to be out there half an hour to 15 minutes before sunrise, and then when you get to your first mile marker, you stop the vehicle, shut it off, and step away from it, and then you'll want to start a timer. It's very important to standardize that time that you're listening for, because you're going to count the total number of birds that you hear during that 5-minute time period. So in doing that, after you count for 5 minutes, you're done with that mile marker for the day, so you can move on. You can actually count all your mile markers in a single morning. And you'll want to do that 3 times per year. It's important. Another thing to think about is actually alternating the starting mile marker. If you start on mile marker 1 or 0, you're going to want to start on 7 or 8 for the next time you go out, because the number of calling birds will actually change as the morning goes on. They hit a peak sometime around sunrise, and then they'll gradually decline as the temperatures warm up and as the day goes on. That's in general. So you want to spread that variation out across your different mile markers. This is what the call count diagram looks like. We call it a bullseye diagram for obvious reasons. The stick figure in the middle there is it represents you, the listener, whoever it is that's at the mile marker, and then you're just recording the number of different birds that you hear around you. So in this example, they heard 4 bobwhites during that 5-minute period, and 43 different calls. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that this is these call counts, these spring call counts for bobwhites. You're listening for that iconic bobwhite whistle. And then you can also do these counts for scaled quail as well. They make a little bit different sound. They make what's called a walk call. I won't try and duplicate it, but you can. There's various links. I think Dr. Cappy's posting some links for more information where you can go to. You can hear those calls online to really know what you're listening for in that. So the next task that I'm going to cover is the fall Covey counts. They're done at opposite times of the year, obviously, but the methodology is very similar, so I wanted to cover these together. You're using, for the fall Covey counts, you use that same diagram, but instead of counting the number of calling roosters, you're actually counting the number of calling coveys. So bobwhite quail will make a morning covey call, or what's called a wake-up call. They only do it once per day, and you'll typically hear one group of quail calling, and you'll know that they're, so by listening, you'll be able to pinpoint the different number of coveys calling on the landscape. And this covey call counts are a true index of relative abundance. So as I said, the methodology is very similar. But the only trick that makes fall call counts more difficult to get done is that you can only conduct one call count per listener per day. So you can only count one mile marker per day. And that's because they only do this call for a very short amount of time. So you have to arrive at the mile marker half an hour before sunrise, listen up to the point where they call, and then record from there. And then you're done for the day. So they typically call sometime like right around sunrise. So a couple of things to think about on call counts. You can't do call counts if it's raining or snowing or any inclement weather, because that's going to affect the birds. You know, they're not going to be calling as much, and you may not hear them. Also, wind goes into that as well. This is the most difficult one to get around. But if it's windy above 10 miles an hour, it's really difficult to get a good count in. And then for spring call counts only, because Covey call counts, you'll be done by this time. But spring call counts, if you're still counting at 9 a.m., it's time to stop, because after that, after the day heats up, you don't want to be out there counting, because your quail have stopped calling, so your counts are going to be low. So, and then another thing to think about, which is kind of overlooked sometimes, is that you need to, if you don't have good hearing yourself, you need to recruit somebody with good hearing, because I guarantee your counts are going to be extremely low if your hearing is bad. So that's just something to think about. This is an example of some of our data from this year for the Texas Quail Index. You can see it's the same data represented two different ways. In the state map, you can kind of see that we had two hotspots really, the Rolling Plains and the Gulf Coast Prairies. The Gulf Coast Prairies performed the best, and if you look at this data compared to TPWD's annual counts, you'll see that they've had the same basic trends they reported. The Gulf Coast Prairies in our counts was by far and away the best region, and TPWD actually has recorded record counts for this year in the Gulf Coast Prairies region, and the Rolling Plains has shown some rebound as well. So just a little aside there, and you can see we had a pretty good coverage of the state with our call counts. So I'm going to put up a couple of review questions for you here, and you can respond with that A, B, C, or D comment again. So during spring call counts, what segment of the quail population are we counting? Is that A, all females, B, all males, C, calling males, or D, calling males and females? So I'll give you a second to answer that here. All right, yeah, C. The answer is C, all calling males. And that's because females don't make the bob white whistle. So it's important to keep in mind with those spring call counts is you're not actually counting, you're only counting a small portion of the true population, and we don't really know which males it is that are calling out there. So that's why it's a little bit variable, and also why we don't use it as a strict index of abundance, but it can be useful for determining how much reproductive effort they're going to put into that year. So the second review question I have for you is, during fall call counts, what species of quail are we monitoring? And I think I may have forgotten to mention this, but it was on the slide, so we'll see if you're looking at the slide. You can go ahead and answer that now. It's A, scaled quail, B, bobwhite quail, C, bobwhite and scaled quail, or D, any species of quail. All right, very good. Bobwhite quail, B. So don't, if you're in scaled quail only country, then fall Covey counts are not a useful tool for you. Okay, moving on to our next task that we have people do. That's our dummy nest, and a dummy nest is kind of just like it sounds. It's using chicken eggs to simulate an actual quail's nest, and this is one of the most time and labor-intensive things that we do, but it's very useful for learning about nesting habitat. I've found, at least in my experience, people don't really understand what nesting habitat truly is, or at least in a lot of cases, until you go out there and try and hide eggs in nesting substrate yourself. And the other thing that this tells you, in addition to being, just a good demonstration and a good learning tool, it can tell you a little bit about the quality of your nesting habitat and that predator index. So how many predators are on the landscape searching for nests during nesting season, and how much nesting cover you have available for your quail. And one of the ways that we try to estimate that while doing the dummy nests, so we place these dummy nests out on the transect, and then we check them every 2 weeks, and you record the number of nests that were depredated and the number of nests that are intact, and you kind of use that as an index to compare across sites, across different areas of your property. And another thing that we have people do is estimate the number of suitable nesting clumps per acre. That's what this gentleman's doing in the photo on the right there. What you do is you walk the transect. So you have these eggs laid out in the transect, and then you walk the transect back and count every suitable piece of nesting cover that's rooted within your arm span. And by doing that, you know how long the transect was, and you know what your arm span is, so you can estimate how much area you covered and extrapolate that to an estimate of nesting clumps per acre. And what you want to be able to do is, or what you want to see on the landscape is about 300 nesting clumps per acre when you do that. So I have on the next slide, I have another pop quiz question for you to see how much you know about suitable nesting cover for quail, and have you answer this question of which one of these does not make suitable nesting cover for quail? Is that A, basketball-sized bunch grass, B, hula hoop-sized prickly pear, C, low-growing brush, or D, yucca with dead leaves at the base? I'll give you another second there to answer. Okay. Yeah, most of you knew. The question was really between the low-growing brush and the yucca, right? The quail don't typically use brush as nesting substrate. So when you're monitoring your nesting habitat, you want to be looking for your prototypical large bunch grass. It's not any bunch grass on the landscape, but it has to be at least basketball size and preferably 3 feet tall. And you're also looking for those low-growing prickly pear that are at least roughly the size of a hula hoop. And also quail will nest in yucca, but they don't typically nest under brush. So I talked a little bit, I mentioned the predator context during nesting season, and that we use dummy nests to look at that. But another more I guess, rigorous way of looking at it is through our game camera surveys. And what we try and do with the game cameras is to get an index of predator abundance on the landscape. So you can see down in the graph on the bottom, we have the number of predators observed per 100 trap nights. So the methodology behind this is that if you set cameras out and you know how long the camera's been out for, say 30 days, and then you know how many predators were observed during that time, you can actually construct a rate. So you have a visitation rate, and we typically extrapolate that and look at the number of predators per 100 camera trap nights. And then you can use that as an abundance index to monitor the predator population during nesting season, or you can use it to look at, say you want to do some predator control. You can look at it as, in this case, if your control efforts have been effective, or any number of things. You can also just use game cameras to identify what species of predators you have on your property. One of the reasons why we do this during nesting season is because this is a crucial time of the year for quail. They're a short-lived species, so they need to have a good reproductive season to have a good population. So one of the things that we do is we monitor predator abundance during the nesting season. And these predators that we're monitoring, typically the mesomammal predators, which are your skunks, raccoons, possums, foxes, those types of animals, they're the primary cause of nest failure in quail. And they account for a majority of the nest depredations. It also, although they're not typically referred to as a mesomammal predator, I would also throw feral hogs in there as far as important nest predators of quail. So when you're getting started on this, you need to decide what kind of camera to buy, and it's you don't need too many fancy features. You do need an infrared flash. With game cameras these days, you can pay almost as much as you want to pay for a camera, but really for this, a good a quality, less expensive camera is going to do just as well as a real expensive brand. So the ones that we use for the Quail Index are actually little Bushnells. I've been very happy with them. They're only about $130 or so. What we do is set them up along the roads. We typically it's best if you can set landscape timbers, like this landscape timber in the photo is set into concrete. They should be set relatively close to the road, where the camera can be placed at a 45-degree angle, so you can see, you can get a clear field of view of predators moving up and down the roads. And the reason we do that is because that's the most commonly used travel path as they're moving from one area to another. And also it's easy to get quality clear pictures on the road. So the most important thing, I think, in setting cameras up to survey predators is to remember that any vegetation in front of that camera is going to obscure your view, and it's also going to trip the motion sensor anytime the wind blows. So you need to make sure that your locations where you're setting the camera are more like this, where there's no vegetation in front of it that's going to trip the view or trip the camera. So the next thing that we do is our habitat evaluations. These habitat evaluations are done using a standardized sheet. This sheet has also been turned into an app for iPhones. It'll walk you through the whole process. I prefer the app because you don't have to do any math associated with it. It does all the math for you. It'll calculate your averages and scores. So we use this habitat score to compare not only to our estimates of abundance of quail, but also to compare across different areas of the property. And we use these to identify weak links in the habitat. So you can see this is the habitat in paper form, this picture here. And we make you go through and identify or assess 5 different areas of the quail habitat. So 5 different essential needs. Well, 4 different essential needs. Water we include on the evaluation, but water is really just a bonus. Quail don't need water to survive, but it's nice to have it on the landscape. So we do include that in the evaluation. But the other factors, nesting cover, woody cover, food sources, and the arrangement of those 3 factors are very important for quail. They need all 3 of those factors in a small area, because quail don't travel large distances. You need to look at your habitat on a small scale, basically, because if you have nesting cover on one side of your property and you have your escape cover on the other side of the property, separated by a 2-mile distance, your quail are never going to find it, because they stay in the same area throughout their entire lives. So the way this habitat evaluation works is you go through each factor and you'll give it a score. For instance, for nesting cover, it says what percentage of the area supports suitable bunch grass clumps or prickly pear colonies. And so you're giving that a score from 0 to 1. And a good score for nesting cover would be something in like 50% of the area supports suitable bunch grass clumps or suitable nesting cover. And so you'll go through each one of these and get a score, and that translates out, or you average those scores, and you can determine whether or not it's poor, fair, good, or excellent habitat. So this is an example of some of the data that we have from our index this year. Most of the habitat evaluation scores from the participating counties ended up in the good to high good to excellent range, and I think that was driven by some timely rainfall that we had to bump nesting cover, and also the fact that generally properties that are willing to participate in this program are going to be interested in quail management from the start. So they're likely to be some of the better properties. But even so, we evaluated of the participants of the evaluations that they turned in. We identified that nesting cover was the most common weak link on the properties, and I'd say that's probably true across most of quail country in Texas. And that's probably because it's difficult. You know, you need the rainfall, and you also need reduced grazing pressure to have that really good nesting cover. So one of the simplest things that we do, moving on now to roadside counts, are these counts. It's basically just counting the number of quail that you see on a route. This is what Texas Parks and Wildlife does every year. They do these counts where they go out and they have many different routes set up within each ecoregion. They drive a 20-mile route, and that's how they come up with the quail forecast graphs. This one's from the Bob White counts on the rolling plains. And if you were to do this on your property, it's probably not directly comparable to TPWD's numbers because they're done on a much larger scale. But if you were to do this year after year, you would see something similar to these population trends, and you could monitor your quail in comparison to the overall ecoregion trends that you're seeing. these are really the least labor-intensive thing that there is to do. Basically, you're just driving a route, either in the dusk or dawn hours, 2 hours after sunset, 2 hours or 2 hours after sunrise, 2 hours before sunset. Ideally, you'd be able to put together a route that's 20 miles or more. That may not be totally feasible on your property, but basically, the longer the route you can put together, the better your data will be. We ask that people go out and do this 3 times a year to get an average, and the response that you're looking at for this is just simply the number of birds that you counted per mile. So when you drive these, you want to make sure that you're at least less than 20 miles an hour, because you don't want to miss birds along your route. Depending on the vegetation cover, it may be difficult to see birds. So you want to make sure that you keep your speed down along the route. And this is an example. This is an example of the roadside count data sheet. And you can see here, we just started out at 0 distance, and then you start your vehicle counter at 0, and then you record where along the route you're seeing the quail. So for example, at half a mile into the route on this day, we saw 1 covey of 8 quail, 1 covey of bobs. And you can do this for both scaled quail and bobwhite quail. It's effective for both. The last measure that we have in the Texas Quail Index is our harvest index, and that's where we want people to keep track of the number of quail that are harvested per unit effort. And when I say per unit effort, that's typically the number of hours that are hunted, the number of dogs, number of hunters in the party, those types of things. So what you're doing is you're really constructing a rate, a number of quail harvested per hour, say, or per hunter per hour, something of that nature. And this is a response. You can use it as an index of quail abundance over time. But we also would like to be able to relate this to our other factors, our other quail abundance estimates. So is there some combination of spring call counts, roadside counts, fall covey counts, and predator surveys, say, for instance, that we can use to predict the number of quail that are going to be harvested in the fall? And so there's one other thing from this, the harvest index, you can also use as an assessment of production for the year. So when you look at your bag, you want to look at the number of juveniles that you have compared to the number of adults, and you can use that ratio to see whether to assess your production, which is how successful were they at raising new members of the population to put in for that year. How successful were they during nesting season at producing more quail for that year? And typically, your rule of thumb is if you have a 3-to-1 juvenile to adult ratio, you figure that's a pretty good year for production. So the way you look at that is on the birds that you have in hand. You can look at their primary covert feathers. They're located on the top of the wing, right there on that in this photograph. You can see the adult primary covert feathers are all one color. They're solid, and the juvenile primary covert feathers have these white tips on them, and that's how you tell the difference between them. So that's an overview and a description of all of our protocol with the Texas Quail Index, and everything that we're doing this year. These are all protocols, that you could implement yourself. You may not want to do the whole thing, but maybe you could pick and choose as to what you want to look at on your property. And so with that, I guess I'll turn it over to questions. We have a few minutes or so for some questions. And I want to thank you, Dr. Taylor, for
Yeah, you bet. It's my
hosting
pleasure. While we give everybody just a minute or two to kind of formulate any questions they might have in the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and push out a survey for you. Now, this is going to pop up likely in front of your Collaborate window, your webinar window, so you may have to move the new web browser window out of the way. If it doesn't pop up right away, just give it a little time and it should load. I'll also put that link here in the chat box too, in case you wanted to access that directly. And we sure would be interested to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Well, Becky, I don't see anybody typing in the questions. I guess you did a very thorough job. I certainly learned a lot. Very interesting. If you experienced any troubles today with your audio or any of the slides not popping up, just rest assured that we have recorded this and we will make it available at foresterwebinars.net in a day or two. Last thing I would like to do then is, while we're waiting for some feedback here on questions, is if everybody would just move your mouse over to the little emoticon that's to the left of the participants window, and you'll see, if you move your mouse over it, you'll see an applause button, not the raise hand button, but the applause button. And let's give a big round of applause to our presenter today. There's your virtual applause.
All right. I'm scrolling back through the chat window. I don't see any questions in there either. But
All right. So John asked, what is the minimum acreage recommended to raise quail?
Well, I would say that it probably depends on what's around you. So if you're in a highly fragmented landscape, I would think that it's going to be very difficult if you have, say a section of land or something, or a couple of sections of land. It's going to be very difficult to maintain a quail population. But if you have a lot of connectivity between those sections of land, then your chances are going to be a lot better. Some of the research in South Texas has shown on thousands of acres, quail populations can go locally extinct. So I don't know. I don't know that there's any minimum acreage, but the more connectivity you have between different habitats, the more chance you're going to have of maintaining that population over time.
Looks like we have a few more people typing in questions, so we'll give it one more minute here.
Okay.
If you look at that one from Brian, I've noticed the frequency of quail on my property has decreased since my neighbor put up a high fence. What effects do they have on quail?
I'm not aware of any particular research on this. As far as whether a high fence has an effect on survival, whether flying into it or not. But I would imagine that a high fence would, in some cases affect movement, although, I mean, quail can still go, they can travel through the fence on the ground. So birds are you know, typically moving from area to area on the ground. So I wouldn't think that it would affect their ability to migrate in that way. And I would think that there'd be some effect of mortality, a small effect of mortality, but I mean, quail there's so many different factors that are playing into quail mortality. I don't think you would see a population level effect. Oh, a question from Jeffrey McDowell about quail index sites in Berks or Jim Hogg counties. Yeah, possibly for the next year. We don't have any in that site. One of the problems we ran into down there was that the ranches, our county agents couldn't get access to any ranches down there. So if you have a county agent in the area, if you're interested, I would contact your county agent and go from there.
Well, I think that concludes our webinar for the day. Becky, would you be willing to put your email address into the chat box there in case anybody has any questions after the webinar's over?
Yeah.
And there certainly is a wealth of information that appears there on the chat box. All those links that were made available for you. So, with that being said, I think we'll end today's webinar. Thanks again so much.
Okay, thank you.